This is March 16th. We need a whole meeting, March 16th, 2023. I would like to call the meeting to order and let's have a roll call.
Trustee Hallwax, trustee Listener.
Here.
Trustee Mulvaney, trustee Underdog. Here. Trustee Rubin. Here. Trustee Bree. President Rowan.
Here we have a quorum. We are not live streaming this meeting tonight, but we're video recording. We'll make the recording available on the village's YouTube channel. The first item of business is the public comment. This allows for those in attendance of the meeting to address the board regarding non-agenda items. I'll ask the public comments concerning agenda items be made at the time we reach that item on the agenda. All comments are limited to 3 minutes, and I'll notify the speaker when the time is up. Are there any public comments about non-agenda items? No. Okay. The next item on the agenda is a discussion regarding the possible renewal of a licensing agreement with Glencoe Streetery. I'll ask Assistant Village Manager John Pate to present and then go from there.
Thank you, President Rowan. Tonight, we're going to be talking about potential extension of the lease agreement for Glencoe. Ultimately, what we'll revisit toward the end of the discussion is whether or not the board wishes to extend the licensing agreement that's been currently in place. And if so, does the board wish to adjust any of the fee schedule for that licensing agreement? Some background on the item: April of 22, the village board took steps kind of all inclusive across this. So approving the design guidelines for outdoor dining structures, amending the fee structure to what it is today. Nothing existed previous to that. And then authorizing a second amendment for the licensing agreement at Glencoe, which also included, as you'll remember, their plans for the proposal of the construction of the streetery. So in summer of 22, Glencoe submitted the permits, submitted plans for permitting for that streetery structure, and then had it fabricated. That took some time. And then in mid-October, opened up that streetery to the public. Which of course brings us to now. The current licensing agreement for Glencoe is set to expire on April 30th of this year. So without extension, that would expire at the end of next month. Glencoe is of course requesting an extension of that licensing agreement and wishes to continue that program. Some of the notes, and Jerry Muldoon, the general manager of Glencoe, is here to speak, and we'll turn it to him just after my presentation here. But some of the notes from them with the conversations that they've had with staff include kind of the consideration that the program so far has been well received by their customers. It's also only been open in the winter months where they have those panels on the side all the way kind of closed in, and heaters operating to make it as cozy as possible in that structure. But they're also hoping to kind of be able to actually finally get a chance to test the full program, which includes some of the removal of the panels that are on the sidewalk side of it to make it, more open air and kind of enjoy the patio there as they move into the warmer months. The fee structure that was set back in April of last year is 50 cents per square foot per month. Glencoe's been paying that since May of 2022. They're 899 square feet of use. Totals a monthly bill of $450. At this time, staff's not recommending a change to that fee structure. You'll remember that the discussion back in April of last year was to put a fee in place that kind of recognizes the fact that this is a public space being used for a private, private business in the community, and not wanting to discourage, wanting to discourage underutilization of the space. Kind of making sure that any business that takes advantage of this program has some skin in the game, but at the same time, not wanting to completely prevent the use of the space or hamper the economic development opportunities of any business using that space. So again, the village kind of did some surveys last year, and again this year, kind of refreshing us, looking at other programs throughout the whole Chicagoland region of similar uses. Public use space that's being reserved for the private use by one business. As you can imagine, many different variables in that survey of different communities as to program specifications, use of the space, where that space is it extra space, is it completely unused before? But all to say that still across the board, those fees are trending lower than what the village currently has in place. And so for that reason, we're recommending not to adjust the fee schedule and to continue with it, what it's been so far. Again, I have some of these pieces. I'm actually going to skip past the next slide. I just wanted to show some of these pieces. This is one of the renderings that was submitted with that permit process. I think this gives a good idea. Obviously, people are probably more familiar with what this looks like, which was taken just last week. This is what it looks now, but we haven't yet had a chance to see it with those panels removed on the side. This kind of gives you an idea of what they expect it to look like during the warmer months, where it kind of becomes part of their patio seating there outside of the restaurant. So again, Jerry Muldoon from Guildhall's here, and him and myself are both happy to answer questions if the board has.
Good evening, everyone.
Welcome.
Thanks. So I didn't put any formal presentation together. I really wanted to be here to, aid in any inquiries and, questions that folks do have. But in giving it some thought, and try and give a little context for everybody about what our wants and desires are so we got the street up and running. We call it the street, by the way. We're looking for that to become a thing. So we didn't get it open until October, mid to end of October, due to just having difficulty getting materials and construction and so on in. So we, although we've had the lease since, arguably almost a year for that particular structure, we did have, as a reminder for everybody, we did have the greenhouses into, I want to say, May or June, then we pulled them down, and then we just had the what we call the patio area there, which is enclosed by the three walls without any type of coverage. So a little difficult at this juncture to really get a decent sense of how it's going to perform. Its first few months we're in the thick of Chicago winter. We did find that it's been well received and folks have liked it. We're not filling it up 7 nights a week, although the demand is not there to fill the restaurant up 7 nights a week in general terms anyway. But Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, we fill it up. There's a desire for people to be there. You can make the reservation right online as a separate experience, or what we find is people coming into the restaurant, and fortunate for us in those nights, will generally be full and reserved completely. So if you did make a reservation, you would have to, that would be an option for folks. We find 9 out of 10 people are happy to do it. And then when they go in, they're really pleased. And as it gets into the 20s or teens, it's fairly pleasant. Now we have enough heat, we feel, to fill up the space. If it is in the teens, it's beautiful. Even though we provide blankets, and it's just not a comfortable experience. Yeah, family friendly. We found it particularly family friendly. Children really love it. It seems like it's kind of, it's a novelty, it's a thing for the kids. We've had some, special events there celebrating some milestones and birthdays, and we've had baptisms in there. So for that reason, it seems to be really well received. It becomes a private space for those folks. Writers Theatre, we found the last 2 weeks since Writers Theatre is back up and running. Like last night, we had a really busy night trying to help them. Really, from a lot of folks that they were heading to the Writers Theatre, and when we didn't have reservations and opinions, and the spillover was there. We are finding that it's in fact, this past Monday, we actually just celebrated our 10-year anniversary that we opened up the restaurant. We just, a few months back, we signed our lease for another 10 years, which is something we're quite proud of, and looking forward to they just being, partner in the community for the remainder of the time. Yeah, that's. I'm happy to answer any questions if folks may have.
Thanks very much. Let me just say, the village of Glencoe is glad you're there. You're an important part of what we're up to. I personally think the business district is in the best shape it's maybe ever been in. I attributed a lot to the theater, but we need restaurants too, and for the first 45 years I lived in this town, you couldn't have a restaurant. I just couldn't make it. So we're glad you're there. My thought, I think we should do this as proposed for this year. I have two questions, not for this year, but for going forward. One is, the streetery it's a big thing, and it has a big impact in our little business district. It looks different. We did it initially because of the pandemic. I'm not positive what the right answer is, whether we want this and more of them, or not this and none of them, or maybe just this. But we have the plan commission is working on a comprehensive plan. That's a good opportunity to investigate what we want our village business district to look like. Likewise, I have no idea what the right number is for what we're charging. But it's not, it seems to me this year is not the occasion to do anything with it. So we should look at both of those things, but not this year. So I think we should do it.
You say do it, what is the it?
The it is extend the license agreement with the, the $450 a month fee.
Staff recommended in the memo to extend the license agreement by a period of 1 year. So the board could choose a different time period, but that's what the extensions, the supplement.
And the idea is the plan commission will have an opportunity as we formulate the plan. So to our plan commission members, don't blow it. Figure out what we should do and what's the best way to do it. And we also are going to try to educate ourselves on whether we're charging too little or too much or just right. But for now, I'm satisfied. We should, Guildhall has just invested in this thing, and I think we should give them a shot to do it for a year and then see. That's my thought.
I have two quick ones. The rendering showed what looked like a screening. Will there be some kind of a visual screen, or is it going to be what's there now on the road side of the?
So, these, in fact, it's made up of really, I guess, one, two. These are actually 4 panels. One is, in fact, an actual panel, which which is the entranceway, which has a doorway that opens and closes, which we found helped to keep the heat in and cold out. The other 3 here are actually curtains that draw back. So they remain there, and they can come and go to rather easily to defend against any type of inclement weather. These right here at the north and south, and this is what the east side. There are 3 panels, and as you see, it's more or less as you like this right here. That just literally, it's a physical structure that just physically comes out, and then can get put back in.
It's like a rigid panel.
Yeah, it's made of like a thick plastic vinyl.
Oh, it's a vinyl. So it's what's there now.
Yeah,
That's correct.
That's what's there now.
Yeah.
That's a window.
Correct. These here, right here, exactly, and all of these here also can be removed.
Yeah.
We're actually in the process of the company who built it for Triangle Awnings, and met with them last week we're not convinced at this week. It's really kind of going to be more of a field thing. Otherwise, if all of them was a good idea to have all of them out, or do we keep the east side in perhaps, or the north and south? Really, it's kind of wind directional. And if the wind itself not being a big problem, but wind and rain combined perhaps being a problem.
My second question was off hours. What's the protection or intended use? And I'm thinking, could there be a use off hours? Could there be a meeting space or place for people to, like a common square, a more public space?
Yeah. You sure? I mean,
if somebody was off hours sat in there, what's the issue?
yeah. Well, there's not a lot of off hours.
Yeah.
We kick it off at 11 o'clock, 7 days a week until 9, 10 at night.
Yeah.
Right. So there's not much downtime,
Yeah.
really, and we were open all day long, between lunch and dinner. and then from general on. So there's really not much idle space in terms of, you know, we don't have services going.
Yeah, okay.
A question for staff. Wasn't this reviewed by the plan commission as part of their design review responsibilities?
I don't know the answer to the question.
I don't believe it was. I believe the board set, when this was approved last year, last April. the Board essentially established it because it falls outside of the physical built environment. And it sits within the public right of way. It's the purview of the village board. So this body determined that.
I mean, we're not doing it now, so, but you know, seems to me this is something the village board should do. We're sort of kicking the can down the road. I hope we look, you know, even more closely following the plan after another year experience.
If I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just a comment from the public. Just to plant a seed, regardless of, you know, depending on what the planning commission decides about the long-term establishment of this. It is, if it isn't, you know, agreed to go forward and keep it in place. Regarding rental, it seems to me this is an extension of the restaurant. And a fair rental would be, what is the fair rental value of square footage for a restaurant? Not the 50 cents a square foot.
So, you know, obviously, there is a theory like that. In fact, a year ago, I heard myself say that. And, you know, on the other hand, we survey what other municipalities are doing in similar circumstances. My guess is the answer is somewhere in between, and we'll have to figure that out.
There may be some kind of discount, but
I like I said, I heard myself say that, you know, I'm not positive it's right, but it's obviously a thoughtful thing to say. Next year.
I'm sorry if I just,
go ahead.
I'd be remiss in not saying it. I mean, we may seem obvious to some, but I mean, what we've talked about and considered the partnership that we have had as a group for many years now, in particular the last couple of years, is a valuable partnership to us, and we just want to extend those thanks and say thank you to, you know, it's, you know, we really feel like when we opened up the restaurant many years ago, you know, part of the goal of the restaurant was, you know, to provide a, you know, like a good spot for the community to go and hang out in, a credible restaurant with, you know, what we consider really good food and really good service, and you know, just to be able to do that. And you know, the partnership has allowed us to do that, to get through the pandemic. We simply would not have got through the pandemic if we had enough greenhouse. We probably likely would have closed the restaurant because we just didn't see a way forward. So I just want to say thanks to you for that.
Gary.
I am in favor of the proposal on a 1-year extension. I've said it before, but say it again anyway. If we are going to do something on a longer term basis, Plan Commission feels like that fits in well with what the downtown would look like, then let's do it right. Let's mutually invest the money to have it be part of the streetscape appropriately, not, well, this is the best we could do, you know, Jersey barriers, et cetera. Have it, you know, really be on sidewalk, normal curbing, et cetera. And, you know, there'd have to be some kind of an agreement to pay for that, which means, you know, some investment all the way around between the landowner and ourselves, undoubtedly you as the tenant. But anyway, that's for another day. I'm in favor of this personally, and I echo the fact that we're glad you're there.
Anybody else? Otherwise, I think we know what's going to happen when we put it on the village board agenda.
Yeah, we'll put an extension, or at least extension on the agenda for it.
Okay. The next item for our committee of the whole meeting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. We're going to go back and feed some people. Bye.
is a discussion regarding the village's family care leave pilot program. I'll ask our assistant village manager, Sharon Tanner, to take that.
Thank you very much. So here we are exactly 2 years from when we first came to the board with a family care leave pilot program. And as we started off the discussion 2 years ago, it's still an appropriate place to start this evening, that the paid family care leave pilot program was created as an outgrowth of our strategic plan and goal to be an employer of choice. To create benefits and policies that are meaningful to employees, are sustainable, and can help distinguish us among not only municipal employers, but also private sector employers as well, because we do compete for talent with both public and the private sectors. And so to recap some of the core of the family care leave pilot program, it was created as an expansion of the 2-week childbirth adoption leave benefit that we had in place since the early 2000s in order to broaden it to be available to a wider variety of family care situations, recognizing that employees have care needs that aren't solely limited to childbirth or adoption. And it also built on the FMLA, that is the Family and Medical Leave Act, which requires us to provide up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to employees for certain family care leave situations. And our program provided up to 6 weeks of paid leave for situations that qualify for the FMLA, as well as family care leave situations that are expanded beyond the scope of the FMLA. A quick crash course on the FMLA, I'd mentioned it's 12 weeks. Employees are required to work here for at least 12 months, worked at least 1,250 hours in that period. And if leave qualifies for the FMLA, we cannot deny it. So there are protections to that leave. And so when we built our family care leave program, we started with the FMLA's requirements and made them just a bit more stringent in that employees needed to work here for 12 months, but they needed to be full-time employees for 12 months. So turning back to the pilot program, the program was developed as an intentionally progressive benefit to recognize the diversity of family structures that exist, and also the complex integration that employees are often facing between their work and their family care needs. And as I'd mentioned earlier, as a tool to help distinguish us as an employer of choice, not only among our public sector competitors, but also private sector as well. The current program is scheduled to sunset on June 30th of this year, and we committed to coming back to the board before that time to talk with you about what direction we may go. And so that's the discussion we'd like to have this evening. There's quite a bit of information in your packet, and so I'd like to talk through a few of the top line points this evening about some of the takeaways from the program. First, the pilot's been in place for almost 2 full years, and our first takeaway is that the program's functioning as designed. It's been used by nearly all departments of the village for different types of family care situations. And what we've seen is that most of the program participants are those who are either earlier in their tenure, who haven't had the opportunity to accrue a significant amount of time, or those who are maybe later in their tenure with the village, but have had more ongoing family care needs, and they've depleted their time as they've worked because of those ongoing care needs. We're seeing that employees are using the program very responsibly and judiciously. They're not requesting more time than they need. And we have an application process that's consistent with the FMLA to be sure that we're getting appropriate certification from medical providers that the employee is indeed eligible for family care leave. And so employees have been quite responsible. Not every leave event has required the full 6 weeks of leave. Some have been much shorter than that. Some have been the full 6 weeks. And what we've seen is that there's been a blend of family care situations that the program has been applied to. Less than half of the instances of family care leave were for childbirth. The remainder were for things like parental care, caring for a child with a serious health condition, or for a spouse with a serious health condition. And when I say parental care, I do mean for a serious health condition, not typical standard care. We haven't found that the program is causing a significant uptick in leave usage overall. What we have seen is that there are some instances where employees are able to take more of their leave that they needed as paid leave rather than forcing them into an unpaid leave situation if they didn't have the time available to them. And so we tie that back to the fact that all of the cases that we saw during the pilot program also qualified for the FMLA. So these were serious or major situations that would have caused an employee to be away from work, regardless of whether or not we had the program, but the program provided a paid leave vehicle that for some employees helped them bridge that period. Along the same lines, the program has not been driving up the village's costs, and it's actually been quite financially sustainable. A large amount of the program's costs are sunk costs. We budget for our employees for 52 weeks a year. And so we don't necessarily anticipate that there are going to be periods where they're forced into an unpaid leave situation. So this is not a net new cost. It has been quite sustainable. We're also not seeing a significant operational impact. Again, tying back to the fact that the situations that have caused employees to take the leave are things that they would have been needed to take the leave for, even in the absence of a paid family care leave benefit. What doesn't come through as well in the memo, and some of what I wanted to share with you after having had some experience administering the program, is the personal impact that it's had on our workforce, because it really speaks to the employment relationship between employees and the village. One thing that's obvious, but I'll say it anyway, our employees' families are so special and so important to them. And we've heard from employees about the lengths that they've gone to in the past to provide care for their family members, especially when they have ongoing care needs, whether that's taking unpaid time off, paying caregivers instead of themselves taking unpaid time off, or having to be the primary caregiver because no other family member can do that. And so sometimes the burden does fall solely to our employee. Employees have been absolutely profoundly grateful for the program. I've had people in my office in tears saying this is life-changing. I'm so grateful to the village, and it means the world to me that you care about my family. And so it's really showing that this benefit is easing some of the pressure that they've felt, and employees have shared very personal accounts of some of the strains that they've encountered and how this is helping them. It's also been very attractive as a recruitment tool as well. I met with one new employee during the onboarding process, and when I was explaining the pilot program, their jaw was just on the ground and said, "This is amazing. You're telling me that you provide this," and I said, "Yes. You just pilot right now. You need to work here for a year at a time, but yes, this is a program that we offer." And they just said how wonderful it was. And we're also seeing this program as a helpful recruitment tool with our public safety officers, particularly our lateral hires. The chief and I work closely with the Public Safety Commission in the entry-level hiring process and also the lateral hiring process. And in nearly every set of interviews, we hear from at least one applicant in the lateral process saying that as they read our job ad and as they read about this program and the fact that the village values employees being able to take care of their families, they said, "This is part of the reason why I chose to apply here. I wasn't necessarily looking other places or being very selective about where I'm applying, but this says a lot about you as an organization and as an employer." And so that has been pretty profound as well. We believe that family care leave can be a good employee retention tool, and it's certainly never guaranteed that employees won't leave the organization. At some point, employees do move on. But we think that having a paid program can help lessen the likelihood of employees who are in more complex situations having to face a difficult decision of, do I want to stay in my job if I'm going to be in this unpaid situation, or if I have these ongoing care needs and it's just too much of a burden to bear. It can help. Whenever we can avoid the cost of turnover and the operational disruption of turnover, we think it benefits the village. And so with the pilot drawing to a close in a few months, we're requesting your feedback this evening about the program and possible ways forward. And based on what we learned in the pilot program, particularly about how it's functioning as intended, we're recommending that the board consider moving out of the pilot phase into establishing this as an ongoing benefit to employees. We are also recommending that the board consider increasing the maximum benefit from 6 to 8 weeks. Since we started the program 2 years ago, we've seen more paid family care leave programs enter the public and private sector landscapes. There have been a couple of bills introduced in the General Assembly, neither of which appear to be moving at the moment. But I think it underscores that the concept of paid family care leave is an important one, and not one that's moving away from the landscape of public and private sector employers. And so as we continue to look to our policies and our benefits and ways that we can try to get a leg up in being an employer of choice, we're hopeful that this can continue to be one of the tools that we have in the toolbox. So I don't have a great deal of information on the slide. I do have some usage statistics that were in your packet if we'd like to look at those, but certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you for the clear presentation. clear memo. So I think we should do this. I would note that the pilot program was passed right before I started with my job. And in the almost 2 years I've been here, I've never heard a peep about this was a problem, it was abused, that we're spending too much money, not a peep. So it seems to me that it's got all the positive benefits Sharon has identified. No, it's not free, but there's really nothing negative about it. It doesn't match some of the private sector. You know, I know that Nikki, Sharon, and my daughter all went on maternity leave at the same time. My daughter's maternity leave was at least 12 weeks. They were throwing money at her the whole time. So I don't, I'm not worried about us being too generous. I think we should be as generous as we can be. And I think, particularly looking at the usage, I think if we can push it up from 6 weeks to 8 weeks, that'd be great. It would show a commitment to our employees. So I'm all in favor of this.
If I may add, thank you for that feedback. Not every use case required the full 6 weeks. I couldn't remember if I mentioned that, so I just wanted to make that clear. Some did, some did not. Again, employees were very responsible.
I assume the maternity leaves are more likely to, some of the others may not.
Just all depends on the circumstances.
Right. Sure. I do remember, by the way, when I started being a lawyer and women started being a lawyer around the same time, and there were moms at the time, many of those moms thought they were supposed to have a baby and go back to work the next day, and did. And that I note that has changed, and that's a good change. Anyway, I'm in favor. Good presentation. I'm glad we're doing this. I think it's helping the village. I feel better about the village for doing it.
I'm completely in favor of it. I'm completely in favor of making it permanent, extending it to 8 weeks for all the reasons that were laid out. And I, especially given the staffing challenges that we're facing, which aren't going to get any easier, is to the extent it's a differentiator, great. But frankly, just to help retain the people that we have, and even if somebody's not taking the benefit necessarily, but they understand we care and we really do, and we're showing them in a real way, I think is very important. I think it's very important from a DEI perspective. Just all the things that the chair rolled through, which was an excellent presentation. So I'm very much in favor of it.
Yes, my opinion, first of all, as a small business owner, we don't get benefits like this. Unfortunately, we can't afford to. And so there's plenty of public, private sector employers out there that can't match this. So I would say if we're successful at 6 weeks, we have to be on the leading edge of, if 6 weeks already is satisfactory, and I believe the governor signed a bill this week giving everybody an extra 5 days of paid leave for any reason taken annually. We're actually talking about 3 months. Is there a reason that we need to be? And I don't mean to sound hard-nosed at all, because I'm just thinking of our taxpayers, our residents, and we'd all I'd love to get four months. I agree, it would be great, but. So I'm just wondering if everyone was so happy with the 6 weeks, do we need to extend it more at this point?
It's a great point, and certainly a conversation for the board to have. I think, as we've talked about, there can be a variety of situations. There are those that go well beyond 6 weeks of time. There are those that are less than that. So it is a bit of a judgment and a bit of a decision as to what the board feels is an appropriate amount of time. Touching on the Paid Leave for All Act, if I may, there's a lot of clarification that's still yet to be had about that bill. So I was speaking with one of our labor attorneys about it just last week, and there's a lot of details still being worked out. It's not necessarily that it provides a net increase of an additional week for those that already had leave, but rather it sets the floor as employees needing to receive at least 1 week of paid leave during the year. So again, there's so many news reports that touch on it.
Right.
Yeah, it's not been comprehensively reported on, and there's a lot of details that are still being ironed out.
I don't want to spend our residents' money unnecessarily. But I think the program and adding 2 weeks will be better for the village. It'll help us hire people, help us retain people. I note if you look at Sharon's memo, that the largest use is in public safety, where and everybody is getting killed. And if we can differentiate ourselves, we should. And plus, like I said, in the scope, I appreciate your situation, and Gary and I look at ours, and it's a totally different world. 8 weeks was happening 20 years ago, and they're now up to 12. So,
Keep going.
anyway, right, or 16, and unpaid after, yes. So anyway, I'm totally in favor of extending permanent and 8 weeks. And, we'll try to save money someplace else.
You will, and to the extent there is an economic differential, in fact, it would only be if an employee had to take the time, couldn't do anything else but take the time, and therefore it became unpaid time off to the detriment of the employee, and you just saved 2 weeks of that. In a situation where they,
And I'm totally fine.
but your point's well
I
taken,
just wanted
but
to
it's,
raise it.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
all.
but we don't have revenue generators.
Yeah.
No, we don't have revenue generators. It's not like, oh, they're gone, we're not making money. Right? It's same taxology coming in, but it's a valid point, but it's going to be a pretty small differential.
Yeah, I mean, you're just paying somebody else overtime, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely fair.
So,
Absolutely fair.
I-
Yes.
I was
Still think we can do it.
crazy because I realized it's going to come off sounding, but on the other hand. Yeah.
How do I recall you, Rich?
I know what
But do we have the cost, the extra 2 weeks? Is that a memo? How much
Supposed to be
extra?
100,000.
How much extra does it cost the village to go from 6 to 8?
You can define it that cleanly.
Okay.
You could define it clearly just by taking the estimated amount of time of usage to throw some kind of average pay. There's a way to do it.
Sure.
It's not.
It's all assumption at that
Yeah.
point, because it assumes how many employees would take it at any given time. And an average salary.
Yeah, you can take like the last year, the pilot had 2 weeks. on everyone that did it.
took the full 6?
There were 6 instances where off the top of my head, 6 where the full 6 weeks was used.
Out of 16.
Out of 60.
Out of 16. And 2 of them were, at least 2 were moms, because we could ask them.
Though I think those were all childbirth situations.
Yeah,
So,
But it
they
went-
would take the extra 2 weeks out of that.
We have
I'm just
seen,
thinking of cost of recruiting and hiring. How long
Right.
it takes to
Oh
get
my
people up to
God.
speed and how long until they're productive on the job? I guess.
I would say that was part of the conversation that we've been having internally, is the struggle with loss and turnover of staff is the impact on the rest of the organization, as well as the time to bring a new person on board, get them proficient and productive. And that's not an insignificant period of time, depending upon what you're seeking to hire. Certain positions are getting less and less available to us. I will say we are seeing industry-wide, just through our professional associations and the contacts that we have, a number of private sector organizations that serve the public sector harvesting good public sector employees because they have significantly more rich benefits packages than we could provide. And employees' tastes are changing. I think, the public sector for a long time, the security of the public sector has been an attractive feature. Certainly pension components is an attractive feature, but some of those things aren't as important for certain parts of the workforce. And we're seeing that. We're seeing people who aren't waiting until they're vested in pensions leaving. That's happened in the public safety department. It's happened elsewhere. And so I think those are factors that are kind of bigger than Glencoe, but that are impactful for us as we think about it. The other aspect, and again, this is something Sharon and I were just talking about, is finding ways that are relatively cost neutral. We all are aware of the thrust of pay. It's a struggle for the private and public sectors right now. And we're all scratching our heads as to how long and how much. And I've had that conversation with many of you one-on-one, and we've talked about it as a group. That's an aspect that we're also very conscious of in looking at what can we do as an organization that perhaps has a value, but doesn't necessarily have an absolute cost on an annual basis every year. Remote work policy is an example of that, and putting that in place that can, for certain employees, be cash back in their pockets by not commuting into the office a couple days a week or a day a week. This is another, if I need it, it's there type of a program that, as Sharon recounted, I do think is meaningful. And I've had conversations with many of my counterparts in other communities about this program, all of whom are saying we're working on it too. We may be at the leading edge now. I don't think we will be for much longer. I think it's starting to take hold, and we're going to start seeing these elsewhere as well.
And I think
I've got a couple of technical questions. What does this cover? Does this cover things like adoption, mental health, fertility issues, or those kinds of things?
So that's a great question. Yes to adoption. It covers childbirth, adoption, or placement of a child in foster care with the employee. It covers care for a family member's serious health condition. And so we've utilized the FMLA's definition of serious health condition, which has a few specific guideposts in it related to frequency of care, types of conditions, things like that. As far as the family members that are potentially covered by this program or subject to this program, we did broaden it compared to the FMLA to be a bit more inclusive, recognizing that there's much more diversity in family structures than just parent, spouse, child. Our employees have many different shapes and sizes of families. Mental health, yes, certainly very much could be a serious health condition within the FMLA's definition, most definitely.
Taking care of grandparents.
We did include grandparents. So long as grandparents have a serious health condition. And again, it wasn't intended to be kind of a one-off, if somebody has a cold and they're staying home from school or a routine doctor visit. It is meant to be those more significant events.
right.
Okay.
Okay. So Sharon, what it goes in the actually takes this up.
So we'll be back at the April board meeting with the 9-item for formal considerations. Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
the last item for our committee meeting is discussion of the final report and recommendations of the gasoline powered heat blower working group. I'll ask our village manager to present.
You guys get me on this one, I'm sorry to say. But I wanted to just get started by saying welcome to Barney Gallagher, who's the STF chair. And the STF really is the body that got all of this conversation started in the first place, that led to what is really a really fantastic intergovernmental effort on this particular subject that I am hopeful has the ability to grow into other intergovernmental partnerships and discussions. So just to walk through real briefly a quick background. Take yourselves back to October of 2021. The STF made a recommendation following the completion of a study that they did that the village should work on approving a multi-year phase out for all gasoline powered leaf blowers in the village. And this was a committee of the whole discussion. And with that recommendation, the board really talked quite a bit about it and thought through some of the struggles of enforcement, some of the concepts related to landscapers who are working in this community, and we have 140 licensed landscapers that work within Glencoe's corporate limits, which is a bit of a stunning number, I think, when we think about how large our community is. But the impacts to them and really the feasibility of moving forward with a program like this. And the recommendation that came from the village board was, if others would work on this with us, we might be more effective. There might be a better outcome overall. And what that led to was the creation of a working group that consisted of 11 communities up and down the North Shore. It consisted of environmental and industry advocacy groups. There were 2 landscaping companies that were represented, as well as their professional association, the Illinois Landscape Contractors Association. Go Green, in the form of Go Green Wilmette, was a partner in that, as well as a park district. The Deerfield Park District participated as well. And the study of this issue really took on a much broader, perhaps, study than we initially anticipated. Of course, sometimes that happens when you put a bunch of village managers in a room. But what it, I think, resulted in was a comprehensive look at this subject. Perhaps more comprehensive than we anticipated, but definitely wide-ranging, and I think gives a real solid sense of a good path forward. I did co-chair that working group along with my colleagues from Highland Park and Wilmette. Hall Healy, who was the former chair of the STF and is still a volunteer with that group, also served on the committee, which was made up of appointed, elected, appointed and elected officials, volunteers, and again, representatives from these communities. So the final report, following about a year of work, was completed in December, and it's been included in your packet. I'm sure you've read it all cover to cover. It's 60 pages long, but the most important part are the first several pages, which is the executive summary. And I'm just going to walk through real quickly a little bit of the outcome of that analysis. So I think an important outcome, particularly as it relates to the efficacy of a policy like this, was that given the analysis completed, and that was an analysis that was supplemented by a group called the American Green Zone Alliance, AGZA, who were brought in to provide some resources and guidance and discussion. They are actually an electric and battery powered lawn implement advocacy group. And one of the big components of their discussion was, given the physical constraints of the North Shore, and by that, that's not a bad thing. We have a robust urban forest. We have tens of thousands of public trees and countless tens of thousands of private trees, all of which drop their leaves at the same time in the fall. That moving toward a full out ban right away would be very difficult, considering the limitations of technology as they exist today. Not because the technology isn't it isn't possible for that technology to work, but the financial cost to implement that technology would be fairly staggering right now, because we're in this transition window. And that was why the report landed with that today, given what we know in play and is in place and where the technology is moving, a complete ban is not likely to be practical at this point in time. We walked through, however, several policy options, because taking a step back, the communities that were represented had a fairly broad level of restriction on this particular subject. For instance, the village of Lake Bluff has no restrictions whatsoever on the use of gasoline-powered leaf blowers. The village of Glencoe has, since the late 1990s, had a restriction on the use of gasoline-powered leaf blowers, essentially from May 15th to September 15th. So a summertime ban, a seasonal ban. And then there are bits and pieces across the other communities that were modestly different. But that really is, today, the most likely restriction that's in place. So given that, the several policy options that came out of it were no change, just monitor it and make decisions later on. Nobody on the committee felt that that was a realistic path forward, that perspective was just, a bit of, why'd we do all of this if we can't develop something out of it, which is where really the next 3 bullet points come in. The second bullet point is that seasonal ban, very similar to what Glencoe has in place. And there are communities that are taking that step right away. Village of Lake Bluff is a good example of that. And they are moving forward with a seasonal ban. And that seasonal ban is going to take place this year in 2023. The third bullet point is one that we spent a lot of time talking about as probably the most practical in 2024 and beyond, which is creating 2 windows in the spring and the fall, particularly focusing on the fall because of the cleanup period, that would accommodate the use of gasoline-powered leaf blowers. This was a recommendation put forward by AGSA. And secondly to this was the 4th option, which was eliminate the spring cleanup option and just go with the fall. If you remember going back to the discussions that we had, back in 2021, one of the things that the board talked about at that time was trying to do something regionally as well. And in the discussions relative to a regional approach to this, there's a lot of interest. And it does appear that interest is focusing on option 3 as an incremental step, with the desire to have further steps as technology evolves and gets less expensive. John, can you pass? Thank you. And so ultimately, recommendation that many of the members of the committee that are going back to their communities and talking about is that recommendation to implement option 3. I presented this report to the STF on the 28th of February, and we talked a lot about that. And we talked about, whether it was a far enough step. I do think the cost considerations were perhaps one of the more startling outcomes of this study, because it can be quite expensive. And while many of the large scale landscapers, the Marianis and Scopatellis, both of which participated in the working group, have already begun the process of transitioning, there was a lot of concern about the impact to the small single vehicle 2-truck landscaping companies that do a lot of business on the North Shore. And how could they afford to comply with this? Or would we be forced to essentially be in a constant enforcement environment with them, and tickets, and could there be something that we work toward And so that recommendation of option 3 was put forward to the STF. I think there was a clear desire to do more and to continue to review this, and a desire to not just wait for someone to remember to do it again, but to actually say we should review this again in a few years. And that's, if you've read all the way through the report, that's also in there, that we believe as a group of communities that the technology is advancing and there's value in another review of this sooner than later. So I will tell you, there are a number of communities that have made presentations to their elected boards, Northbrook and Wilmette being 2 that are very close by, that are working toward that option 3. Northbrook just made that presentation this week. Highland Park is contemplating the same option. And so there is some centering around the same policy structure, which was very much what we went into this process wanting to come out with. So several village considerations for you to talk about this evening. I'm happy to answer questions. Is, working toward that implementation of option 3 and working toward an effective date of January 1 of 24. So next year, tying that in to really what will be a public outreach and education campaign and a very aggressive effort with our landscaping community to talk to them about what this means, to help them to get prepared for a transition. There's been discussion and a number of communities are struggling with this, as do we, relative to how do you deal with this on large parcels like golf courses and special districts, park districts, school districts who have large spaces. And this is a subject that I think for the most part, communities are maintaining exclusions. Today, we have exclusions. But I think what we also discussed at length was, this is that opportunity to start working very closely with those operations to say, all right, let's find paths to eliminate the use of this equipment in these areas, but let's work toward that as opposed to a large scale transition. Public safety has been stepping up enforcement over the last few years. Barney tells a story about his landscaper getting ticketed. And I think what we would anticipate is continuing that effort. We've seen kind of a steady increase in the number of citations that have been given, and those citations are meaningful. That the landscaping companies are not excited to have to pay those. And that is something that we would continue to work on and to try to do as much as possible uniformly across this region. I think a big part of this is the village continuing to be a leader itself in practicing what it preaches. We have begun the process of removing gasoline-powered leaf blowers from our operating departments. Public Works, I think, has 2 backpack blowers in operation. We have 3 or 4 handheld battery-powered leaf blowers. We are also working with our contractors to include, we're actually going out to bid for landscaping services to include alternates for electric and battery-powered equipment to be used when they're working here in Glencoe. Village of Lake Bluff has been doing that for a couple of years. That has resulted, I believe the increment between one and the other was about 3% of cost. And they elected to move forward with that. And as we get more information, we'll be presenting that to you. And then an idea that came out of this that's still under review is finding a way to share licensing across communities. How can we unify our licensing process so that perhaps if you apply as a landscaper for a license in Wilmette, you understand that that license could also be functional in Glencoe, that you have to abide by the same rules from stem to stern. So from Wilmette all the way up to Highland Park, we're all unified. Everybody understands that we have access to a shared database. And we're working on what that might look like. That's not as easy as it sounds, but it's absolutely would make life easier overall for landscapers and to help with compliance. When we can share basically the same information across communities. So long and short of it, this was a really interesting effort. I think with a really good outcome, as I said to the STF, their leadership really was on display with these 11 communities and others who were participating. And I think I know will lead because we've started to have some, side conversations about what's next. What are we going to look at together next as it relates to sustainability issues or other intergovernmental opportunities. So with that, I will shut up. Those are the considerations. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Before we get questions from the STF, is there anything you want to tell us, or is it covered? Are you okay
I
with
think
this?
Phil did a great job reviewing what we went through. It was, we would like to go further. We would really like to push the envelope further. But the one thing that I will say, I read the report with skepticism, particularly the cost. The difference between a fully loaded, gas powered blower program and a electric program is 12 to 1. Almost $12,000 to do this properly with electric versus about $1,000 for gas. I didn't believe it, but I read the report, so I went out and did some research, and yeah, it's true. It may be a little less than 12,000, but it's still a lot of money, big difference. And so when you're looking at these smaller operators, we have to give them some kind of, we're putting them on notice. It's going that way. You're going to have to make the transition, start planning now. And and from our perspective, the gas powered leaf blowers is phase one. As the technology improves, gas powered lawnmowers, etc., all going to be taken off the table, but it's going to take time. The battery technology is not quite there yet.
All right. Great.
My question is related to the exclusions for golf courses or special districts, schools, et cetera. Merely because they have a lot of trees, but the leaves presumably fall about the same time of year as everybody else's trees. So it's seriously why
And they're used differently. If to talk about, Stella can talk about a golf course operation. They're in use fairly regularly on a golf course as opposed to just seasonally. With respect to removal of leaves, they're used for many other purposes on a golf course. So that's an aspect of this that I think we would want to perhaps it's an ease in that's not quite as quick as this, but I do think that that's a piece of this that is somewhat unresolved and could be something that we move forward more quickly, but those costs are just as significant for them as they are for
So have we blown it on, because we're effective January 1, 2024, because it's March and it's too late for this year to make the change we're talking about, which is April.
I think so. I think blown it is not quite the word I'd use, but I think there's a rational way to implement what is a fairly wide-ranging change that is going to be a not insignificant cost for some providers. I think giving them the opportunity to ease into it would be preferred. It's not mandatory.
Well, we're talking about spring cleanup. I mean, in terms of Glencoe, the change, as we're saying, you now spring, there's a short period of time when you can use your gas powered blower, and then not again until the fall. That's what we're going to be doing. It's sort of too bad we can't say that to them this year, because people would have to decide to get the cleanup done in April, but otherwise.
Well, we have a restriction right now.
Right.
We can't use it as a major.
I got that, but so it's a 2 week.
Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah. It's not big.
Not big, but it's 2 weeks. And to me, like I said, I obviously golf courses, schools, the environmental impact for them is exactly the same as it is for everybody else. The noise is going to be different because they're not next to anybody, and that's why we've always, why in the past we've had these limitations. Anyway, this seems like, I'll just, my point of view, I regret that we can't do this tomorrow, but we all get it. I mean, 12-1 that's a big difference, and you sort of suspect the price difference is going to decrease. This is a good start. So let's, to me, this seems like a no-brainer that there's been a lot of hard work, and they've come to a good, hopefully, group solution that will make it possible to have this happen.
It is, well, I was wanted to ask Stella, for example, on the golf course, the uses other than with regard to leaves, is it a question that, right now, gas blowers, my understanding are still generally more powerful, if you will, than the technology available with batteries. Is that why golf courses, et cetera, would have to continue to use them because of the technology?
And the surface for the greens, even before they can be mowed, have to be completely clear. Otherwise, it would damage the green. So trees are dropping, not just leaves, but seedlings and other debris. Some trees drop some pretty hardy seeds that if you get caught in a mower would rip up your green. So every day the greens are attended to clear them. It's also, the playing surface for golf. It's imperative to have that as clean as possible. You're judged by, the quality and condition of your greens, which then generates revenue if people say you're well conditioned or are not well conditioned. But it is a daily process, and 126 acres.
So
it's pretty large.
So
to even try to tackle with. At this point, there are no battery operated machines that would be able to manage the amount of acres that we're blowing.
I think
that's a good reason.
The reality behind it is battery life is not equal to gasoline yet. And you need a large number of batteries to kind of meet the need. We'd have to retrofit some equipment probably to have charging out on the course. So it's not impossible, but I think those are
the technology has a part of it. Because otherwise, or like if it was just, it's a bit of an extra cost, the village really wants to lead on this issue, then I'd want to talk about what the cost is and is it worth it. But it doesn't sound like throwing money at it's going to do it in any realistic amount. So it really is just can't really be done well, right?
I think there's a way to certainly ease into it, and I would say that that's an aspect of what we should be looking at relative to the golf course operation. But that's true of all of the golf courses, not just in Glencoe, up and down the shore, and there are a lot of them.
I'll challenge this a little bit or suggest that a way to ease in could be some incentives. I don't know, school incentives or landscapers.
Certainly some.
Provide documentation that they are moving faster on this issue. Why not give them incentive to do so? Challenge someone, I don't know for sure, but the backpack battery units I think are equivalent in terms of blowing power.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So the issue then is, of course, the as you say, it's easier to fill the gas tank than the battery. So in terms of getting back up to there's got to be other uses besides the greens where perhaps we can just start to displace some of our public use of a gas powered blower. And finally, I would say that the best health, the most important health implications are to the user. Talking about our employee, which is that discussion about this extra insurance, this is a direct health impact, not only to their hearing, but also to the air quality in which they're breathing. So if we're not providing them gas masks and proper ear protection, we're really doing a disservice, and that needs to be full operation of blowing leaves Finally, I would really love to see some commitment in our policy for education, the education between public works and landscapers and education between Village Hall and the residents. About the need to, it's okay if you have a leak in your yard. Like, this is okay. You don't need to pull out your gas blower and blow it into the next town. Right? We can live with some leaves in our yard. In fact, it's a great benefit. We have expressed in our village discussions real desire to improve our environment. This has a very direct impact, starting with soil improvement, insects, birds, all depend on leaf litter being left on the ground. You mulch it all up, send it to the North Shore, they mulch it, by the way, that produces methane gas in the decomposition, negative. Yes, we get dirt for that. Dirt's not the highest value thing going around. So I think we can do more than what we've got here. And I think if we just had a conversation about being committed to the health of our employees, this is like a supernova thing. Right? We have employees breathing this fumes on a single stroke engine, by the way, it's a highly emitting. It's not like breathing your gas exhaust. It's from your car. It's much worse. It's not a poor stroke, right? So, yeah, I think we do more. Great, we're doing this. Sure, wonderful. I do believe Glencoe influenced the region. I think this is a really good thing to do. I don't think we should be limited by what the region mindset is. I think we can have our own thoughts and leadership and position that goes beyond what perhaps some of our more conservative neighbors are.
And just to add to your point, Pete, and I kind of glanced over it, but I think a big part of what we talked about with this group was the fact that the ultimate goal of all of this is to reduce the overall usage completely, right? And that involves a significant amount of education in changing perceptions about what has to be, right? And I think you hit the nail on the head. That's a struggle among all of these communities, that there is a real a preference for perfection in lawn care, and turning that ship is a little bit of a slow effort, but one that needs to go hand in glove with this. And so I think that's a commitment that the STF has already kicked off, that we need to take up some notches. Particularly, it's not just to leave the leaves in the fall, but it's, how do you manage that through the year?
Education program.
Yes.
So keeping the leaves out in front of the hall would go a long way to educating the public.
Had that conversation.
So, look, I thought that was a useful point. It won't stop us from doing what we're going to do, but so the STF keep going, both with respect to, we look at this in 3 years, but also in what we can individually do, like our employees or leave the leaves. We did that this year in our yard. We left them until the end. A lot of got pushed to the side. Anyway, okay, but Dudley,
I'd like to
absolutely.
echo that about the importance of educating the individuals. My own case, I give my personal blower to the landscaper. Say, when you're working on a property and got it next to the garage, it's all charged up, just go do it. And so again, education and encouraging people, quotes, to do the right thing. Thank you.
Okay, so I think
So
it's clear what we should do.
We'll get some ordinance modifications going.
Okay, good. And then STF, under its current and new leadership, can keep doing it. Okay, that covers all the agenda items. Is there any other business for our committee of the whole? And if not, is there a motion to adjourn to our next meeting at 7?
No motion. I wanted to go back to the eatery. I think I articulate this concern. So if it's not secured, do we have appropriate coverage, insurance coverage? And are we clear if somebody ends up in there after hours, is that breaking and entering? Is that a crime? What's the deal? And if we have that all figured out in insurance, fine. But I just want to make sure we know, and do we have a requirement for them to secure that hut in the evening?
We'll take a look at the language in the licensing agreement. They do have to provide a certificate of insurance for the use of the public right of way.
But does that just during their operation?
I don't believe so. I believe it's for basically 24 hours a day. But what we'll double check is what their plan is for the evening hours. If it's as easy as Jerry seemed to make it sound that they can snap these panels back in place, they may want to secure it in the evening hours. They will have tables in there. They're not going to move those inside.
I think we have to mandate them that they work.
Yeah, we will certainly talk to them about that. And then when we bring the licensing agreement back next month, we'll have that resolved.
Carrie, does this give you any grief or concern?
Not necessarily, no. If someone was inside there after hours, it would be trespassing at best, which is.
They are secured now. So the only question is, they're locked now. The only question is with them opening up the sides, will they be putting panels back in at the other?
Well, it sounds like, the original design, the sides were completely gone. I think what they ultimately designed was windows that are removable. And again, they may simply snap those in place every night when they close, but they're open 7 days a week now. They just reopened on Mondays. So that's a good thing. So there's not, 2 or 3 days that go by where nobody's there, but we'll work through that with them, make sure that that's resolved before this comes back.
Yeah, I think the lawyer will figure it out, but the fact that they ought to lock it up is different than us requiring it for liability.
And I'm fine with requiring it if that's what the board's preference is. I don't think it's explicit right now in the licensing agreement, but we can include that language. I don't think they'll have a problem.
We should think it through, because I don't know. I mean, if it isn't locked up, how different is it than the park?
Well, nobody has a lease on it.
Well,
We'll talk it through with them, and we'll talk it through with our attorneys, and we'll make sure that's clarified before this comes back next month.
is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Your second,
Second.
all in favor? Thank you, everybody, and see you in 11 minutes.
Yeah.